The sedan sat in the shadow of a parking garage at 6:47 a.m., its engine off, its windows fogged with the breath of someone who had been waiting for hours. Inside, 47 manila folders covered the backseat like fallen leaves, each one tabbed with a name, a date, a case number. Each one representing a life derailed by the same courtroom, the same judge, the same pattern that had repeated for a decade without consequence. Lorraine Vesper sat in the driver's seat, her reading glasses perched on her nose, a pen light illuminating the document in her hands. She wore a brown cardigan over a cream blouse, a midi skirt, flat shoes that would make no sound when she walked. No jewelry except a thin watch. No makeup except lip color that would fade by noon. She looked like a church volunteer, a community organizer, someone's aunt arriving early for a nephew's sentencing. She looked like no one important. That was the point. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. She glanced at the caller ID, then answered without greeting. "I'm going in." Her voice was low, measured, the voice of someone confirming coordinates before a military operation. "If I'm not out by 6, execute the warrant without me." The voice on the other end belonged to Theron Blackwell, Assistant United States Attorney, Civil Rights Division. He had been her handler for 18 months, her co-conspirator in an investigation that had required her to become someone else entirely. "Lorraine." His voice carried concern he rarely showed. "Whitmore has been on that bench for 24 years. He has friends in the state bar, the county commission, probably the governor's office. If this goes wrong, then 47 people stay in prison for crimes they didn't commit." She closed the folder in her hands, added it to the pile. 48 after today. Marcus Delaney is 23 years old, Theron. He has an alibi that proves he was 12 miles away when that robbery happened, and his own lawyer was told to bury it. Silence on the line. They had discussed this. They had planned for months, but planning and executing were different animals, and both of them knew that what happened in the next 12 hours would either justify everything or destroy them both. 6 o'clock, Theron said finally. Not a minute later. Understood. She ended the call, removed her glasses, and looked at the courthouse across the street. Fulton County Superior Court. The building where justice was supposed to live. The building where, for 10 years, a man in black robes had been playing God with the lives of people who looked like her. Today, that ended, one way or another. Courtroom 4C hummed with the particular tension of a trial entering its final phase. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in shades of institutional gray. The air conditioning wheezed through vents that hadn't been cleaned in months, circulating the smell of old paper, nervous sweat, and the faint chemical tang of floor polish. At the prosecution table, Assistant District Attorney Garrison Holt arranged his notes with the precision of a surgeon preparing instruments. He was 44 years old, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than most public defenders made in a week. His conviction rate in this courtroom stood at 94%, a number that had made him the envy of the district attorney's office, a number that had positioned him for a judgeship of his own within the next 5 years. He did not think about how that number had been achieved. He did not allow himself to think about it. At the defense table, Marcus Delaney sat with his hands folded in his lap, his orange jumpsuit exchanged for a suit that his grandmother had purchased from a thrift store and pressed until the seams threatened to give. He was 23 years old, a community college student, a part-time grocery clerk, a young man whose only crime had been walking home from a church event on the wrong night in the wrong neighborhood. The charges against him were armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, criminal threatening. The evidence was an eyewitness identification from a convenience store clerk who had seen the robber for approximately 7 seconds through a plexiglass barrier. The fingerprint evidence had been collected from a door handle that Marcus had touched 3 days before the robbery when he stopped to buy a bottle of water. The surveillance footage from the store had never been presented to the defense. Marcus did not know this. His lawyer had never told him. His lawyer, Mercer Kingsley, sat beside him with the posture of a man who had already accepted defeat. Kingsley was 38 years old, a public defender assigned more cases than any human being could competently handle, paid less than paralegals at private firms, and caught in a system that valued efficiency over justice. His suit was rumpled, his tie was crooked, his eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who had stopped believing that his efforts mattered years ago. He had been told, 3 months earlier, that the church alibi was not worth pursuing. He had been told that Judge Whitmore would not allow it. He had been told what happened to lawyers who challenged Judge Whitmore's decisions. So he had done nothing. And now Marcus Delaney was about to spend 15 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. In the gallery, 32 people occupied the wooden benches reserved for the public. Family members of the accused, law students observing for credit, retirees who watched trials the way other people watched soap operas. A journalist named Indigo Callahan sat in the back row, her notebook open, her pen moving in shorthand that captured details other reporters missed. And in the front row, directly behind the defense table, an elderly black woman clutched a rosary between fingers worn smooth by decades of prayer. Opal Delaney was 72 years old, and she had raised Marcus since he was 6, since his mother had died and his father had disappeared, since he had been a frightened boy who cried himself to sleep and had grown into a young man who volunteered at the church food pantry every Saturday. She knew her grandson was innocent. She had told everyone who would listen. No one had listened. The courtroom doors opened at 9:15, and a woman slipped inside with the quiet efficiency of someone who did not wish to be noticed. She found a seat in the third row, near the aisle, and withdrew a leather-bound notebook from her worn canvas bag. She opened it to a fresh page, wrote the date and time at the top, and began to observe. She did not know that Judge Crenshaw Whitmore had already noticed her. She did not know that her presence had already been reported to the clerk. She knew exactly what was about to happen. Judge Whitmore presided from his elevated bench with the bearing of a king surveying his domain. He was 58 years old, 24 years on this bench, a man whose photograph hung in the courthouse lobby alongside plaques commemorating his service to the community. He served on charity boards. He attended church every Sunday. He had been married to the same woman for 31 years and had raised 3 children who had become a doctor, a lawyer, and a minister. He was, by every visible measure, a pillar of Atlanta justice. He was also responsible for the wrongful conviction of 47 black defendants over the past decade, a pattern so consistent that it defied statistical probability, a pattern that had been protected by colleagues who looked the other way, supervisors who buried complaints, and a system that valued smooth operation over uncomfortable truths. Marcus Delaney was about to become number 48. Mr. Holt, Whitmore's voice carried the casual authority of absolute power. You may proceed with your closing argument. Garrison Holt rose, buttoned his jacket, and approached the jury box with the confidence of a man who had never lost in this room. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past 3 days, you have heard overwhelming evidence of the defendant's guilt. Eyewitness identification placing him at the scene. Fingerprint evidence connecting him to the location and a pattern of behavior consistent with. In the third row of the gallery, Lorraine Vesper wrote in her notebook. Her pen moved steadily, recording not just the words being spoken, but the reactions of the jury, the posture of the defendant, the frequency with which the judge glanced at the clock. She had been watching for 90 minutes when Whitmore's attention finally fixed on her. His eyes narrowed. He leaned toward his clerk, Bellamy Ashford, a thin woman in her 50s who had worked in this courthouse for 18 years and who functioned as his primary enforcer, his gatekeeper, his co-conspirator in everything that happened within these walls. Who is that woman? His voice was a murmur meant only for her. Bellamy studied the woman in the third row. Brown cardigan, simple clothes, worn bag. Nothing about her suggested money or power or influence. Nothing about her suggested she mattered. I don't know, Your Honor. She wasn't here yesterday. Find out. But before Bellamy could rise, before she could approach the stranger and demand identification, something in Whitmore's expression shifted. The woman had looked up from her notebook. Their eyes had met. And in that moment, Whitmore saw something that he did not like. He saw someone who was not afraid of him. Bailiff! His voice cut across the courtroom, interrupting Holt mid-sentence. Remove that woman from my courtroom. She's contaminating these proceedings. Garrison Holt stopped speaking, confused. The jury members turned to look at the gallery. Marcus Delaney raised his head for the first time in hours, his dead eyes showing a flicker of something that might have been curiosity. Bailiff Gage Morton rose from his position near the side door. He was 6 feet 4 inches tall, 250 pounds. A former college linebacker whose career had ended with a knee injury and whose subsequent years had been spent finding new ways to exercise power over people smaller than himself. He enjoyed his job. He enjoyed it very much. Ma'am. He stopped beside the woman's row, his hand already moving toward his belt. You need to come with me. Lorraine closed her notebook slowly, deliberately, as if she had all the time in the world. May I ask what I've done? Judge says you're disrupting proceedings. That's all I need to know. She stood without resistance, tucking the notebook into her bag, gathering her things with the unhurried movements of someone who had expected this moment, had planned for it, had been waiting for exactly this confrontation. Whitmore's voice rang out again, louder now, colored with something that might have been satisfaction. That ghetto trash has been staring at me for 2 hours. Remove her immediately and process her for contempt. The words landed like stones thrown into still water. Ghetto trash. Spoken from the bench. Spoken by a judge. Spoken in open court. with the court reporter's fingers frozen above her keyboard, with the jury members exchanging uncomfortable glances, with 32 witnesses watching a black woman being removed for the crime of sitting quietly and taking notes. Morton's hand closed around her upper arm with more force than necessary. He began to walk her toward the exit, his fingers digging into flesh hard enough to bruise. She did not cry out. She did not struggle. She walked with him, step by step, allowing every person in that courtroom to see what was happening, to witness it, to remember it. But just before they reached the doors, she turned her head, not to look at the judge, to look at Marcus Delaney. She gave him a nod, almost imperceptible, the kind of gesture that could mean nothing, or could mean everything. Then the door swung open, and she was gone. In the front row of the gallery, Mama Opal Delaney rose to her feet, her rosary clutched tight, her voice breaking the silence that had fallen over the courtroom. She wasn't doing nothing wrong, she was just sitting there. Whitmore's gavel came down like a gunshot. "One more word and you'll join her, Mrs. Delaney. Sit down and remain silent, or I will have you removed as well." Mama Opal sat, but her eyes never left the doors through which the stranger had disappeared. And for the first time in 3 days, she felt something other than despair stirring in her chest. She did not know who that woman was, but she knew, with the certainty of 7 decades of hard-won wisdom, that something had just changed. A judge just called a silent black woman ghetto trash in open court and had her dragged out for the crime of taking notes. 47 people have already been wrongfully convicted by this man. Marcus Delaney is about to become number 48. But that woman they just removed, she's not a victim. She's not even scared. She's been waiting for exactly this moment. What happens in the next 6 hours will destroy Judge Whitmore's entire world, and you're going to watch every second of it. The hallway outside courtroom 4C was designed to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings swallowed sound. Marble floors echoed every footstep. Portraits of former judges lined the walls in gilded frames, their painted eyes following the accused toward their fates. Morton released her arm only after the courtroom doors had closed behind them, only after there were no witnesses to see the way he shoved her toward the wall, the way his forearm pressed against her collarbone, the way his face came close enough for her to smell the coffee on his breath. "Judge wants you processed." His smile showed teeth. "Contempt of court, obstruction of justice, intimidation of a judicial officer." He leaned closer. "You picked the wrong courtroom to cause trouble in, sweetheart." She did not flinch, did not look away, did not give him the fear he was seeking. "I'll need those charges in writing." Her voice was level, unremarkable, the voice of someone discussing paperwork. "And I invoke my right to self-representation under Ferretta v. California, 1975. Morton's arm dropped. He stepped back, reassessing. Troublemakers did not cite Supreme Court cases. Troublemakers did not know the year of the ruling. Troublemakers begged, or threatened, or went silent with fear. This woman did none of those things. "You some kind of lawyer?" The suspicion in his voice had edges now. "I'm a citizen exercising my constitutional rights. That shouldn't require a law degree." Footsteps approached from the far end of the hallway. Deputy Thornwell Vance rounded the corner, his court security badge catching the fluorescent light. He was 53 years old, a former Marine, 30 years in the system, a man who believed in proper channels and documented procedures above all else. "What's going on here?" His eyes moved from Morton to the woman to the wall where Morton had pinned her. "Judge's orders." Morton straightened, adjusting his belt. "She was disrupting proceedings. He wants her held until the Delaney trial concludes." Vance's gaze settled on the woman. Something in her posture, in the way she held herself despite what had just happened, made him pause. Disrupting how? She was staring at him, taking notes. Judge called it intimidation. The woman spoke before Vance could respond. "I was sitting in a public gallery observing a public trial, writing in a personal notebook. I spoke no words. I made no sounds. I moved from my seat only when instructed to do so by the bailiff." Vance was quiet for a moment. His Marine training had taught him to assess situations quickly, to identify threats and non-threats, to recognize when something did not add up. This did not add up. "Process her," he said finally, his voice carrying reluctance. "But by the book, Morton. Every step documented. And I want to see the incident report before it's filed." Morton's smile flickered, dimmed. He had wanted freedom to handle this his own way. Vance had just taken that freedom away. "Yes, sir." The words were correct, but the tone was not. He led her toward the holding cells in the basement, his grip on her arm tight enough to leave marks. But Lorraine Vesper walked with her head high, her back straight, her expression unchanged. She had survived worse than Gage Morton, and the day was far from over. The holding cell was 8 feet by 8 feet, painted institutional green, furnished with a metal bench and a toilet that offered no privacy. They had taken her bag, her notebook, her watch, her dignity. They had left her with nothing but her clothes and her thoughts. She sat on the metal bench with her hands folded in her lap, her breathing slow and measured, her mind running through scenarios like a chess player calculating moves. Whitmore would push for maximum contempt charges. Morton would testify to whatever the judge wanted. The system would close ranks the way it always did. But they had made a mistake. They had let her see inside, let her document, let her record. And now she had everything she needed. At 10:30, they brought her back upstairs. Not to the main courtroom, but to a smaller chamber where contempt hearings were conducted. Whitmore had decided to deal with her personally, to make an example before returning to the real business of convicting Marcus Delaney. The chamber held perhaps 40 people. Whitmore sat elevated behind his bench, robed in black, wielding absolute power. Garrison Holt occupied the prosecution table assigned to secure a contempt conviction against this troublesome woman before lunch. The defense table was empty, because she would be defending herself. Ms. Vesper, Whitmore looked down at her with undisguised contempt. You've chosen to represent yourself in this matter. I'm allowing it only because I believe everyone deserves the opportunity to understand just how thoroughly they've miscalculated. She stood at the defendant's position, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. I appreciate the court's willingness to observe proper procedure, Your Honor. Don't mistake procedure for sympathy. His voice was sharp. You disrupted my courtroom, intimidated this bench, and now you're going to learn what happens to people who think they can challenge my authority. With respect, Your Honor, I entered silently, sat in a public gallery during a public trial, and took notes in a personal notebook. These activities are protected under Richmond Newspapers versus Virginia, 1980. The First Amendment guarantees the right of the public to attend and observe criminal trials. Whitmore's expression flickered. The citation was correct, the law was accurate, and the challenge, however politely delivered, was unmistakable. The First Amendment does not protect intimidation of judicial officers. Then I request discovery of any evidence supporting the claim that I engaged in intimidation pursuant to Brady v. Maryland. Holt rose from the prosecution table. Your Honor, the evidence is the court's own observation. Judge Whitmore personally witnessed the defendant's threatening behavior. If Judge Whitmore is the sole witness to my alleged crime, then he cannot serve as both witness and judge in this proceeding. That would violate the fundamental principle of judicial impartiality established in Toomey v. Ohio, 1927. The courtroom fell silent. Whitmore's face flushed red, then deeper red. No one challenged him in his own courtroom. No one cited cases at him. No one made him look uncertain in front of his staff, his prosecutor, his bailiff. Ms. Vesper, his voice dropped to something dangerous. You are testing the limits of my patience. I'm exercising my constitutional rights, Your Honor. I apologize if that creates inconvenience. When Judge Whitmore charged Lorraine Vesper with contempt, he expected her to crumble. Instead, she cited case law from memory and demanded her constitutional rights. Most people facing a hostile judge don't have that knowledge, but they could. Legal Shield provides instant access to qualified attorneys for just $29 monthly. Know your rights before you need them. Protect yourself today at LegalShield.com/justice. Because in a courtroom, knowledge is survival. The contempt hearing lasted 47 minutes. Lorraine called Morton as her only witness, forcing him to describe under oath exactly what she had done to warrant removal. His answers grew increasingly vague, increasingly defensive, as she methodically dismantled the prosecution's case. Bailiff Morton, you testified that I was staring at Judge Whitmore in a threatening manner. How long did this alleged staring last? The whole time you were there, almost 2 hours. 2 continuous hours of staring without looking at the jury, the defendant, the prosecutor, or anyone else in the courtroom? That's what I observed. And what specific behavior during that staring constituted a threat? Did I make verbal statements? No. Gestures? No. Did I move from my seat before you approached me? No. Did I display any weapons or objects that could be construed as weapons? No. Then what exactly was threatening about a woman sitting silently and taking notes? Morton's jaw tightened. You didn't look like you belonged there. The words hung in the air, their implication impossible to miss. Lorraine let the silence stretch for 3 full seconds before speaking again. I didn't look like I belonged in a public courtroom. Can you elaborate on what someone who belongs looks like, Bailiff Morton? Objection. Holt was on his feet. Counsel is badgering the witness. I'm representing myself, not acting as counsel. And the witness opened this line of inquiry by testifying about my appearance. Whitmore's gavel came down. Sustained. Move on. She moved on. But everyone in that chamber had heard what Morton said. Everyone understood what it meant. The verdict was never in doubt. Whitmore found her guilty of contempt, sentenced her to 30 days, and ordered that the sentence begin after the conclusion of the Delaney trial. However, Lorraine's voice stopped him before he could dismiss her. I request permission to remain in the gallery for the duration of that trial. As Your Honor noted, my sentence does not begin until after the proceedings conclude. Until that time, I retain my First Amendment right to observe public trials. Whitmore's hands gripped the bench. He had trapped himself with his own ruling. If he denied her access now, he would be admitting that his contempt verdict was not about disruption at all. It was about silencing a witness he did not want in his courtroom. Fine. The word emerged through clenched teeth. But one sound, one disruption, one breath, I consider inappropriate, and your sentence doubles. Am I clear? Crystal clear, Your Honor. She returned to the gallery to the same seat in the third row and opened the notebook they had returned to her. She turned to a fresh page, wrote the time, and resumed taking notes as if nothing had happened, as if she had not just been convicted of a crime for the act of watching, as if everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. The trial of Marcus Delaney resumed at 11:45. The prosecution had rested. Now it was the defense's turn, and everyone in that courtroom knew how little defense there would be. Mercer Kingsley rose from the defense table with the movements of a man walking toward his own execution. His suit was more rumpled than it had been that morning. His tie had been loosened, then tightened, then loosened again. His hands trembled slightly as he shuffled his notes. Your Honor, the defense calls. He hesitated, searching for a name, a witness, anyone who might help. His preparation had been minimal. His investigation had been cursory. His entire strategy consisted of hoping the jury might have reasonable doubt. They would not. Not in this courtroom, not with this judge. The defense calls no witnesses at this time. The words emerged like a surrender flag being raised. We reserve the right to recall the prosecution's witnesses for further cross-examination. At the defendant's table, Marcus Delaney closed his eyes. He had given Kingsley everything. The church program proving where he was that night. The names of witnesses who could verify his alibi. The pastor who had seen him arrive at 7:30 and leave at 11. The security camera footage that would show him in the building during the exact time the robbery occurred 12 miles away. Kingsley had done nothing with any of it. Mr. Kingsley, Marcus's whisper was desperate. The timeline. Ask about the timeline. The robbery was at 9:45 and they arrested me at 10:03. That's 18 minutes for 12 miles. The math doesn't work. Please. Kingsley did not meet his eyes. We'll address that in closing arguments. By then it's too late. You need to... Mr. Delaney. Whitmore's voice cracked across the courtroom. You will refrain from disrupting your own defense. One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt. Marcus fell silent, but his hands clenched into fists beneath the table, knuckles whitening with rage that had nowhere to go. In the gallery, Lorraine Vesper watched the exchange with eyes that missed nothing. She saw Marcus's desperation. She saw Kingsley's surrender. She saw the jury members already composing their guilty verdict in their minds. And she saw Mama Opal Delaney in the front row, her rosary clutched so tight that her knuckles had gone pale, tears streaming silently down weathered cheeks. During the lunch recess, Lorraine made her way to the front of the gallery. She moved slowly, casually, as if she was simply stretching her legs after hours of sitting. But her path brought her close to Mama Opal, close enough to speak without being overheard. Your grandson's alibi. Her voice was barely above a whisper. The church security footage. Did his lawyer ever subpoena it? Mama Opal looked up, startled, then suspicious, then desperate enough to answer a stranger's questions. Mr. Kingsley said it wasn't worth pursuing, said the judge wouldn't allow it anyway, said we should just hope for the best. Her voice cracked. I gave him everything. The church program with Marcus's name on the attendance list, Pastor Williams who saw him there, the security camera that would prove he never left until 11. Mr. Kingsley took it all and did nothing. Lorraine was quiet for a moment. Her eyes moved to Marcus, slumped at the defendant's table, his head in his hands. Then to Kingsley, standing at the window, checking his phone, counting the minutes until he could move on to his next hopeless case. Mrs. Delaney, she met the old woman's eyes directly. Would you object if I tried to help? Ma'am, I don't know who you are. I don't know why you're here. I don't know why that judge hates you almost as much as he hates my grandson. Mama Opal's hands tightened on her rosary. But I've been praying for 3 days. Praying for someone, anyone to see what's happening, to care enough to do something. Her voice dropped to barely a breath. You help him however you can. Please. He's all I have left in this world. Lorraine nodded once, the same almost imperceptible gesture she had given Marcus earlier. Then she returned to her seat, opened her notebook, and began to write. The afternoon session brought cross-examination and with it the first cracks in the prosecution's case, cracks that should have been exploited, that any competent defense attorney would have torn wide open. Kingsley's questioning of Officer Wynne Calder, the arresting officer, was perfunctory. 5 questions, no follow-up, no challenge to the timeline that made no physical sense. But from the gallery, Lorraine watched Marcus watching his lawyer fail him, and she saw the moment when something in the young man's eyes changed from despair to determination. "Your Honor," Marcus stood, his voice cutting across Kingsley's ineffective mumbling. "I want to fire my lawyer." The courtroom went still. Whitmore leaned forward, his expression shifting from boredom to predatory interest. "Mr. Delaney, sit down. I have a Sixth Amendment right to effective assistance of counsel. My lawyer hasn't called a single witness. He hasn't presented my alibi. He hasn't challenged the timeline that proves I couldn't have been at the robbery. He hasn't done anything except help you convict me. Your dissatisfaction with your counsel is not grounds for mistrial. Mr. Kingsley is a licensed attorney in good standing with the Georgia Bar. Then I want to represent myself." Marcus's eyes found Lorraine in the gallery. "Like she did. Like Ms. Vesper did this morning." Whitmore's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, calculation, fury. He had already denied self-representation once today. Denying it again, in the same courtroom for similar reasons, would create appealable issues, would invite scrutiny he could not afford. "Mr. Delaney," his voice was tight with controlled anger, "self-representation is not a game. You have no legal training. You would be placing your fate in the hands of your own incompetence. With respect, Your Honor, my fate is already in the hands of incompetence. At least if it's mine, I'll know who to blame." In the gallery, Lorraine's lips twitched. It might have been a smile. Whitmore conferred with Bellamy Ashford, his clerk, in whispers too low to hear, but his face revealed the outcome before he spoke. "Very well. Mr. Kingsley, you are relieved as defense counsel. The defendant will proceed pro se." Whitmore's smile was thin and sharp. "I hope you understand what you've just done to yourself, Mr. Delaney." Marcus straightened his thrift store suit and approached the witness stand where Officer Calder still sat. "Officer Calder," his voice was steadier than he felt, "you testified that the robbery occurred at approximately 9:45 p.m. Is that correct?" "Yes, that's correct." "And what time does your arrest report indicate that you took me into custody?" Calder checked his notes. 10:03 p.m. 18 minutes. Marcus paused, letting the number sink in. "The robbery occurred at a convenience store on Peachtree Street, correct?" "Yes." "And you arrested me at a bus stop on Memorial Drive." "That's right." "Officer, do you know the distance between those two locations?" Calder shifted in his seat. "I didn't measure it personally. According to standard mapping, it's 12.3 miles. Even without traffic, that drive takes at least 22 minutes. With Atlanta traffic at that hour, closer to 35. Marcus kept his voice even, controlled. "Can you explain how I could have committed a robbery at 9:45, traveled 12 miles through Atlanta rush hour, and been standing at a bus stop at 10:03? Holt was on his feet. "Objection! The defendant is testifying, not questioning." "I'll rephrase." Marcus turned back to Calder. "Did you verify where I was at 9:45 before you arrested me?" A long pause. "We had a witness identification. But did you verify my location, check my phone records, my bus pass? Anything that might show where I actually was?" "No." The admission came reluctantly. "The surveillance footage from the store. Who collected it?" "Detective Morrison." "And is Detective Morrison here today?" Calder looked toward the prosecution table. "No, he's not." "Why not?" Silence. The question echoed in the courtroom. Marcus reached into his pocket and produced a folded document, worn soft from handling. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter this as Defense Exhibit 1. It's the program from a church event held on the night of the robbery. My name is on the attendance list. Pastor Williams signed next to it when I arrived at 7:30 p.m. Whitmore's voice was sharp. "That document was not properly submitted through discovery. It's inadmissible. I gave it to my lawyer 3 months ago." Marcus's voice carried across the courtroom. "I gave it to Mr. Kingsley along with Pastor Williams's contact information and a request to subpoena the church's security footage. Footage that would show me arriving at 7:30 and not leaving until 11 p.m. More than an hour after the robbery occurred 12 miles away." Every eye in the courtroom turned toward Mercer Kingsley, who had found something fascinating to study on the floor. Every person in that courtroom assumed Lorraine Vesper was powerless. The judge, the prosecutor, the bailiff, even the jury. They looked at a black woman in simple clothes and saw someone to dismiss. But power isn't always visible. Sometimes the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone underestimates. If you've ever been judged before you spoke, dismissed before you acted, Underestimated before you proved yourself. This story is for you. Subscribe and stay for the moment everything changes. Mr. Kingsley. Whitmore's voice had a warning edge that everyone in the courtroom recognized. What is the status of the defendant's alibi evidence? Kingsley stood slowly, as if his bones had aged 30 years in 30 seconds. Your Honor, I made a strategic decision not to pursue that line of defense. Strategic? Marcus's voice was sharp. You told my grandmother that the judge wouldn't allow it, that pursuing the alibi would make things worse, that we should just hope for reasonable doubt. You were trying to lose. Marcus turned to face the jury. My own lawyer was trying to lose, and I want to know why. From the third row of the gallery, Lorraine Vesper rose to her feet. Your Honor, I have information relevant to the admissibility of that document. Whitmore's head snapped toward her. Ms. Vesper, you are not counsel in this case. Sit down, or I will add another 30 days to your sentence. I am a witness to evidence suppression, Your Honor. Under Rule 615, I am obligated to disclose exculpatory information that may affect the proceedings. You have no standing to. I have first-hand knowledge that Mr. Kingsley was instructed by someone in this courthouse to not pursue the church alibi. I heard the instruction given. I can identify the person who gave it. The courtroom erupted. Voices rose from the gallery. Jury members turned to each other with expressions of confusion and alarm. The court reporter's fingers flew across her keyboard, documenting every word of the chaos. Whitmore's gavel came down again and again, calling for order that would not come. Bailiff, remove Ms. Vesper immediately. She is in contempt for the second time today. Morton moved toward her, his hand reaching for her arm. But before he could make contact, Deputy Thornwell Vance stepped between them. Judge, wait. Vance's voice cut through the noise with military precision. If she has evidence of misconduct, federal law requires it to be heard. Whitmore turned on him with fury. Federal law does not apply in my courtroom, Deputy. With respect, Your Honor, 18 U.S.C. Section 242 applies everywhere. Vance's posture was rigid, his face unreadable. Deprivation of rights under color of law is a federal crime. If evidence is being suppressed, if defense attorneys are being directed to sabotage their own clients, that's not a state matter anymore. The confrontation hung in the air like smoke before fire. A deputy challenging a judge. A system beginning to crack. Whitmore's face had gone pale beneath its flush of anger. His hands gripped the bench as if it was the only thing holding him upright. Deputy Vance. His voice was quiet now, dangerously quiet. You are out of line. I'm protecting the integrity of these proceedings, Your Honor. If Ms. Vesper has evidence of witness tampering or obstruction, suppressing her testimony creates more liability than hearing it. Calculation flickered behind Whitmore's eyes. He was cornered and he knew it. If he silenced Lorraine now, if he prevented her from speaking, he would be confirming exactly what she was alleging. The jury would see it. The gallery would see it. The court reporter would document it. Fine. The word was torn from him like something physical. Ms. Vesper may testify as a witness in the Delaney matter, but this had better be worth the chaos you've caused. Lorraine walked to the witness stand with the same unhurried dignity she had shown all day. She raised her right hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down as if she had done this 1,000 times before. Ms. Vesper, Marcus approached her carefully. Can you tell the court what you witnessed regarding my alibi evidence? On March 15th of this year, at approximately 2:30 p.m., I was present in the courthouse clerk's office, filing documents related to a civil matter. While waiting at the counter, I overheard a conversation between two courthouse employees. In the clerk's station beside the judge's bench, Bellamy Ashford went rigid. The first voice belonged to a woman I now recognize as Court Clerk Bellamy Ashford. The second voice belonged to a man I now recognize as Public Defender Mercer Kingsley. Kingsley made a sound that might have been a whimper. Ms. Ashford told Mr. Kingsley, and I quote, "Judge says no church footage. We can't have another alibi situation like the Patterson case. Drop that line of defense entirely, or your career in this county is over." The name Patterson rippled through the courtroom like a stone dropped into still water. That's a lie. Bellamy's voice rang out, shrill with panic. I never said any such thing. The witness will refrain from outbursts. Whitmore's voice carried vicious irony, the same words he had used against Marcus, against Mama Opal, against anyone who challenged him. Lorraine continued as if there had been no interruption. I have an audio recording of that conversation, made on March 15th, in the clerk's office, beginning at 2:27 p.m. and lasting 2 minutes and 43 seconds. She reached into her bag, the same worn bag she had carried all day, and produced her phone. This recording captures Ms. Ashford's instruction to Mr. Kingsley. as well as her reference to the Patterson case. The metadata confirms the date, time, and location. Lorraine Vesper could fight a corrupt judge because she had resources most people don't. Financial security isn't luxury, it's power. The power to hire lawyers, to take time off work, to say no to unfair plea deals. Marcus Delaney almost spent 15 years in prison because his family couldn't afford better defense. Don't let money be the reason you lose. Marcus by Goldman Sachs offers industry-leading savings rates with no fees. Build your emergency fund at Marcus.com because freedom has a price, and you need to be ready to pay it. Whitmore's hand trembled as he reached for his gavel. His face had gone gray, the flush of anger replaced by something that looked remarkably like fear. "That recording is inadmissible," he said. "Georgia law requires—" "Georgia is a one-party consent state. Your Honor, I was present during the conversation, which makes me a consenting party. The recording is legally obtained and fully admissible." "You were eavesdropping on a private conversation." "I was standing at a public counter in a government office waiting to file documents. Ms. Ashford and Mr. Kingsley conducted their conversation in my presence. I did not hide myself. I did not use any listening devices. I simply heard what they said when they assumed no one was paying attention." She held up the phone. "Shall I play it for the court?" The chamber fell silent except for the soft whir of the air conditioning and the frantic clicking of the court reporter's keyboard. In the jury box, 12 people leaned forward. In the gallery, Mama Opal Delaney had stopped crying, her eyes fixed on the woman in the witness stand with something that looked like hope. At the defense table, Marcus Delaney stood frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid that this moment might shatter like a dream. Whitmore looked at Garrison Holt, seeking support, seeking rescue. But Holt was staring at the phone in Lorraine's hand with an expression that suggested he was rapidly recalculating his position. His 94% conviction rate had been built in this courtroom, under this judge, with this clerk managing the flow of evidence. If what this woman alleged was true, Your Honor, Holt's voice was careful, measured. Perhaps a brief recess to authenticate the recording would be appropriate. It was not support. It was the first crack in an alliance that had served both men well for years. "Denied." Whitmore's voice cracked on the word. "We will proceed. Play the recording, Ms. Vesper." She touched the screen, and Bellamy Ashford's voice filled the courtroom. "Can't have another alibi situation like Patterson, Mercer. Judge was clear about that. The church footage doesn't exist as far as you're concerned. The pastor never saw anything. The attendance list is a forgery, you understand?" Kingsley's voice, tired and defeated. "And if the kid asks me why I'm not pursuing it, tell him what you always tell them. Tell him the judge won't allow it. Tell him pursuing it will make things worse. Tell him whatever you need to tell him to make him shut up and take the plea deal. He won't take a deal. He says he's innocent." "They all say they're innocent." Ashford's laugh was brittle. "That's why we have juries. Now drop the alibi defense or I'll make sure you never work in this county again." Judge Whitmore has friends on the State Bar Ethics Committee. Friends who can make your license disappear faster than you can say wrongful termination. Are we clear? Bus? Yes, we're clear. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. In the jury box, juror number 7, a black woman named Zora Pennington, who had been watching these proceedings with growing unease for 3 days, slowly rose to her feet. "Your Honor," her voice shook, but she did not stop. "I can't in good conscience continue serving on this jury without addressing what we just heard." Whitmore's gavel came down. "Juror Pennington, sit down immediately, or you will be held in contempt." But Zora did not sit, and one by one, 6 more jurors stood with her. 7 of 12, a majority, a statement that could not be ignored. "We've been watching this trial for 3 days," Zora continued. "We've been watching you silence the defendant, dismiss his evidence, remove people from the courtroom for asking questions. We've been watching, and we've been understanding exactly what kind of justice is being served here." Whitmore's face had gone the color of old paper. His hands gripped the bench so hard that his knuckles had turned white. From the witness stand, Lorraine spoke again, her voice cutting through the chaos with surgical precision. "Your Honor, I request that the court compel production of the Patterson case files referenced in the recording. If there is a pattern of alibi suppression, it is directly relevant to the reliability of evidence handling in this courtroom. That case is closed. It has nothing to do with—" It was referenced as precedent for suppressing exculpatory evidence. That makes it directly relevant to Mr. Delaney's due process rights. Holt rose slowly. His face had taken on the expression of a man watching a building collapse from the inside. "Your Honor, perhaps the people would not oppose that request." Whitmore stared at him with barely concealed betrayal. Holt was supposed to be his ally, his weapon, his guarantee of conviction. and now Holt was abandoning him. The Patterson file, Lorraine continued, concerns Terrence Patterson, convicted 8 years ago in this courtroom of aggravated assault. He had security camera footage proving he was at work during the alleged crime. That footage was never presented to the jury. Mr. Patterson is currently serving 12 years at Georgia State Prison. She reached into her bag again and produced a thick binder, black, with tabbed sections visible along the edge. I have documentation of 45 additional cases with identical patterns. Black defendants with alibi evidence that was suppressed or never pursued. Black defendants whose public defenders were instructed to provide ineffective assistance. Black defendants who were convicted based on evidence that contradicted physical reality. She set the binder on the witness stand. 47 cases over 10 years, all tried in this courtroom, all presided over by Judge Whitmore. Whitmore's voice emerged as a rasp. This is a trial about Marcus Delaney, not a referendum on my career. It's a trial about whether the justice system can be trusted. Lorraine's eyes never left his, and the evidence suggests that in this courtroom, for the past decade, it could not be. From the gallery, Mercer Kingsley rose to his feet. His face was wet with tears. His hands were shaking, but his voice, when he spoke, was clear. Your Honor, I need to make a statement. Mr. Kingsley, you are no longer counsel in this case. Your statement is irrelevant. I'm making it as an officer of the court. Kingsley took a breath that shuddered through his entire body. I was instructed to suppress evidence. I was told my career would end if I didn't comply. I was shown what happened to lawyers who challenged Judge Whitmore's rulings. His eyes found Marcus, still standing at the defense table, frozen between hope and disbelief. Marcus, I'm sorry. I was scared. They threatened to destroy me. They threatened my family. I was a coward, and you almost paid for it with 15 years of your life. The confession echoed through the courtroom, impossible to unsay, impossible to ignore. Your Honor, Lorraine's voice cut through the chaos. I also have statistical analysis prepared by Dr. Sable Everhart, a forensic statistician at Georgia State University, documenting conviction patterns in this courtroom over the past decade. The analysis shows that black defendants in cases presided over by Judge Whitmore have a conviction rate of 96%, compared to 61% for white defendants charged with identical crimes. The probability of this disparity occurring by chance is less than 1 in 10,000. She set another document on the witness stand. Dr. Everhart's analysis also shows that in cases involving black defendants, alibi evidence is suppressed or never pursued at a rate 400% higher than in cases involving white defendants. Again, the probability of this occurring by chance is statistically negligible. Whitmore's gavel came down, but the sound was swallowed by the noise of the courtroom. Jury members were talking to each other. Gallery members were standing. Journalists were typing furiously into phones. The court reporter's fingers flew across her keyboard, documenting every word of the unraveling. And through it all, Lorraine Vesper sat in the witness chair, her notebook open, her expression calm, waiting for the moment she had spent 18 months preparing for. The moment when the system would finally break. Deputy Vance's radio crackled. He stepped to the side of the courtroom, listened, and his face changed. He looked at Lorraine. She gave him the smallest nod. Then the courtroom doors opened, and 2 figures entered with the purposeful stride of people who had authority that superseded everyone present. The first was a black man in his early 50s, wearing a suit that cost more than most people made in a month. The second was older, white-haired, with a bearing that spoke of decades executing warrants and serving justice that actually meant something. Whitmore saw them and understood immediately what was happening. His face went white. His hands released the bench. And for the first time in 24 years, Judge Crenshaw Whitmore looked like a man who had finally run out of power. The 2 men who entered courtroom 4C moved with the unhurried confidence of people who did not need to rush. They had authority that superseded everyone present, and they knew it, and everyone who saw them knew it too. The first was Theron Blackwell, Assistant United States Attorney for the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. He was 52 years old, impeccably dressed in a navy suit that had been tailored to fit him like a second skin, and he carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who had spent 3 decades putting corrupt officials behind bars. His face revealed nothing as he surveyed the chaos of the courtroom, the standing jurors, the weeping clerk, the ashen-faced judge gripping his bench like a drowning man clutching driftwood. The second was Langston Grove, United States Marshal for the Northern District of Georgia. He was 61 years old, white-haired, built like a man who had spent his youth doing hard physical labor and his middle years doing harder mental labor. He had executed more arrest warrants than he could count, but he had never executed one quite like this. He had never arrested a sitting judge in his own courtroom. The gallery fell silent as the two men walked down the center aisle. The jury members who had been standing slowly sank back into their seats, sensing that whatever they had been protesting was about to become irrelevant. The journalists stopped typing. The court reporter's fingers hovered frozen above her keyboard. Even Whitmore stopped speaking. Theron Blackwell reached the bar that separated the gallery from the well of the court and stopped. He did not ask permission to approach. He did not need it. Judge Whitmore, his voice carried to every corner of the room without being raised. Please remain seated. We have matters to discuss. Whitmore's voice emerged as something between a croak and a whisper. This is a state courtroom. You have no jurisdiction here. I'm Assistant United States Attorney Theron Blackwell, Civil Rights Division, Department of Justice. He reached into his interior jacket pocket and produced a document, folded once, bearing seals and signatures that even Whitmore could not ignore. This is a federal arrest warrant signed by Chief Judge Marlo Sinclair of the Northern District of Georgia, authorizing us to take you into custody for violations of 18 U.S.C. Section 242, conspiracy against civil rights under 18 U.S.C. Section 241, and obstruction of justice under 18 U.S.C. Section 1519. The words fell into the courtroom like stones dropped from a great height. Whitmore's hands released the bench. For a moment, it seemed as if he might collapse, might simply fold in on himself like a building whose foundation had finally given way. This is entrapment, his voice cracked. This is a witch hunt. I've served this bench for 24 years. I've been honored by the state bar, by the governor, by— You'll have an opportunity to mount a defense. Blackwell's voice was not unkind. It was simply factual, the voice of a man stating truths that could not be argued with. But first, I'd like to introduce someone properly. He turned toward the witness stand where Lorraine Vesper still sat, her notebook open in her lap, her expression unchanged from the calm she had maintained all day. Judge Whitmore, I believe you've already met this woman. You had her removed from your courtroom this morning for the crime of taking notes. You called her ghetto trash in front of 40 witnesses. You charged her with contempt and sentenced her to 30 days in jail. Blackwell paused, letting the silence stretch. But I don't think you know who she actually is. He gestured toward Lorraine, who rose from the witness chair with the same unhurried dignity she had shown through hours of abuse, hours of threats, hours of being treated like something less than human. This is the Honorable Lorraine Catherine Vesper, United States District Judge for the Northern District of Georgia, appointed 4 months ago by the President of the United States, confirmed by the Senate with a vote of 94-6, currently on special assignment with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, investigating judicial corruption in the state of Georgia. The words detonated in the courtroom like a series of bombs, each one more devastating than the last. United States District Judge, appointed by the President, confirmed by the Senate, investigating judicial corruption. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. The information was too large to process, too impossible to absorb. Then the courtroom exploded. Whitmore made a sound that was not quite a word and not quite a scream. His face went from gray to white to something that had no color at all. The face of a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. Garrison Holt's files slipped from his nerveless fingers, papers scattering across the prosecution table like leaves in a hurricane. His mouth opened and closed without producing sound, his mind frantically recalculating everything he had done in this courtroom over the past decade, everything he had ignored, everything he had chosen not to see. Bellamy Ashford put her head down on her desk and began to weep, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. 18 years of complicity. 18 years of suppressing evidence and manipulating schedules and following orders she knew were wrong. All of it had just caught up with her in the span of a single sentence. Bailiff Gage Morton backed away from Lorraine as if she had suddenly transformed into something dangerous, something radioactive. His hand moved toward his weapon, then stopped, frozen by the realization that drawing on a federal judge would be the last act of his law enforcement career. In the jury box, the 7 jurors who had stood in protest now looked at each other with expressions of stunned vindication. They had known something was wrong. They had sensed the corruption, felt it in the way the judge dismissed evidence, in the way the defense attorney surrendered before fighting, in the way the system seemed designed to produce a predetermined outcome. They had been right. In the front row of the gallery, Mama Opal Delaney clasped both hands over her mouth, tears streaming down weathered cheeks. But these were not the tears of despair she had been crying for 3 days. These were different tears. Relief, gratitude. The tears of a woman who had prayed for deliverance and received it in the most unexpected form imaginable. And at the defense table, Marcus Delaney stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the woman who had just been revealed as a federal judge. The woman who had sat in the gallery taking notes while he was being railroaded. The woman who had allowed herself to be dragged from the courtroom, charged with contempt, threatened with jail. The woman who had endured it all without revealing who she was, without using her power to protect herself. She had done it for him. She had done it for 47 people she had never met. She had done it because it was right. Lorraine walked toward the bench where Crenshaw Whitmore still sat, his robe seeming to shrink around him, his gavel lying forgotten beside his trembling hand. She moved with purpose now, the patient observer transformed into something else entirely. For the record, her voice carried to every corner of the courtroom. My credentials. She reached into her worn canvas bag, the same bag she had carried all day, the same bag that had held evidence of a decade of corruption, and produced a leather credential case. She opened it, displaying the gold badge and the identification card within. Federal Judicial Appointment, Northern District of Georgia, effective January 15th of this year. DOJ Civil Rights Division Special Assignment Authorization dated 18 months ago. She set the credentials on the witness stand for the court reporter to document. And this. She lifted the thick black binder she had entered as evidence earlier. Federal arrest warrant for Crenshaw Whitmore, based on documentation of 47 cases of civil rights violations, evidence suppression, witness tampering, and judicial corruption spanning 10 years, signed by Chief Judge Marlowe Sinclair, endorsed by the Attorney General of the United States. Whitmore finally found his voice. You baited me. You made me do this. You sat there looking like what, Judge Whitmore? Lorraine's voice was quiet, but it cut like a blade. Like someone who didn't belong in your courtroom? Like someone who didn't deserve to be treated with basic human dignity? She took another step toward the bench. I sat in a public gallery and took notes. That's all I did. You chose to have me removed. You chose to use racial slurs. You chose to charge me with contempt for exercising my First Amendment rights. You chose to continue suppressing evidence even after your conspiracy was exposed. Her eyes held his, and in them he saw no anger, no triumph, no satisfaction, only the cold clarity of justice finally arriving. Every decision was yours, Judge Whitmore. I simply gave you the opportunity to make them. Marshal Grove approached the bench, handcuffs already in his hands. The metal gleamed under the fluorescent lights, catching the attention of everyone in the courtroom. Judge Crenshaw Whitmore. Grove's voice was formal, procedural, the voice of a man who had done this many times before, but never in circumstances quite like these. You are under arrest for violations of federal civil rights statutes. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Whitmore stood slowly, as if his body had aged decades in the past few minutes. His black robes, the robes that had been symbols of his absolute authority, the robes that had allowed him to play God with the lives of people who looked different from him, now seemed like a costume from a play that had ended badly. I want my lawyer, he managed. You'll have that opportunity. Grove reached for Whitmore's wrist, and the judge flinched as if the touch burned. But right now, you need to come with me. The handcuffs clicked into place on Crenshaw Whitmore's wrists. The sound was not loud, not dramatic in itself. Just a small metallic click, the sound of steel meeting steel, of mechanisms engaging, of freedom ending. But everyone in that courtroom would remember it for the rest of their lives. The sound of justice finally arriving, after 24 years, after 47 victims, after one woman in a brown cardigan who had walked into the lion's den and emerged carrying its teeth. Whitmore was led past the bench he had ruled from, past the clerk's station where Bellamy Ashford still wept, past the prosecution table where Garrison Holt sat stunned and motionless. He was led down the center aisle of the courtroom, past the gallery where the people of Atlanta had come to witness justice and had witnessed instead its complete perversion. He did not look at anyone as he passed. He could not. At the courtroom doors, a second marshal waited with Bellamy Ashford, who had been quietly taken into custody during the chaos. Her hands were cuffed in front of her, her face blotched and swollen from crying. 18 years of following orders. 18 years of convincing herself that she was just doing her job. 18 years of helping destroy lives that did not look like hers. It had all come due in a single afternoon. What if you could be the next Lorraine Vesper? Someone who walks into a courtroom and knows exactly how to fight back. Southern New Hampshire University's criminal justice program teaches you the law from the inside out. Understand your rights. Learn the system. Become the person who can't be railroaded. Online flexibility. Affordable tuition. Faculty who've worked federal cases. Whether you want to practice law, reform the system, or simply protect yourself, SNHU prepares you. Apply now at snhu.edu/justice. The doors closed behind them, and for a moment, the courtroom was silent. Deputy Thornwell Vance stood near the side entrance, his hand still resting on his service weapon, his face a study in conflicting emotions. He had spent 30 years believing in the system, trusting that the people above him knew what they were doing, following orders because following orders was what good soldiers did. He had been wrong. Every time he had processed a complaint about Whitmore and watched it disappear into the bureaucratic void. Every time he had noticed something that did not add up and told himself it was not his place to ask questions. Every time he had chosen procedure over justice because procedure was easier, cleaner, less likely to end his career. He caught Lorraine's eye across the courtroom and gave her a nod. Not an apology. An apology would come later in private when he had figured out how to put words to the shame he was feeling. Just an acknowledgement. A recognition that she had done what he should have done years ago. She nodded back. It was enough. For now, it was enough. In the jury box, Zora Pennington, juror number 7, the woman who had stood first when standing seemed impossible, remained on her feet while her fellow jurors slowly returned to their seats. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady when she spoke. Your Honor, Judge Vesper, what happens now? To the trial? To Marcus? Lorraine turned to face the jury. These 12 citizens who had been asked to decide a man's fate based on evidence that had been manipulated from the start. The charges against Mr. Delaney will be dismissed. The trial is effectively over. She paused, letting that sink in. But I want you all to understand something. What you did today, standing up, refusing to be silent, that mattered. It took courage to challenge a judge in his own courtroom. It took integrity to say that something was wrong when staying quiet would have been easier. She looked at each of them in turn, meeting their eyes, acknowledging their contribution. The system failed Marcus Delaney. It failed 47 other people before him. But you didn't fail him. When the moment came to choose between comfortable silence and uncomfortable truth, you chose truth. That's what justice looks like when it's working the way it's supposed to work. Zora's eyes were wet, but she was smiling. We couldn't sit there and let it happen. Not after everything we heard. And that's exactly what justice requires. Not perfection. Not superhuman courage. Just ordinary people refusing to look away when something is wrong. Lorraine's voice carried the conviction of someone who had spent a lifetime learning this lesson. Remember that, all of you. Remember what it felt like to stand up, because there will be other moments in your lives when you'll have to make that choice again. And now you know you can do it. The jury members began to gather their things, to shake hands, to exchange contact information with the intensity of people who had been through something transformative together. They would remember this day. They would tell their children about it. They would carry the knowledge of what they had done for the rest of their lives. Then Lorraine turned to face the defendant's table where Marcus Delaney still stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Mr. Delaney. Her voice was gentle now, the voice of a judge who understood what it meant to be caught in a system designed to destroy you. Based on the evidence presented today, the timeline impossibilities, the suppressed alibi, the documented pattern of corruption in this courtroom, I am recommending immediate dismissal of all charges against you pending a full review of the case by the district attorney's office. Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes filled with tears that he could not stop, tears that tracked down his face and dripped onto the thrift store suit his grandmother had pressed with such desperate hope. I don't understand. His voice was barely a whisper. You let them do all that to you. You let them drag you out, call you names, charge you with crimes. Why didn't you just tell them who you were? Lorraine was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of everything she had learned in 30 years of fighting for justice in a system that often wanted nothing to do with it. Because what happened to me this morning happens to people like you every day, Marcus. People who don't have federal badges. People who can't reveal a hidden identity to save themselves. People who get dragged from courtrooms and called names and convicted of crimes they didn't commit, and no one ever comes to help them. She stepped closer, placed one hand briefly on his shoulder. I needed Whitmore to show the world who he really was. I needed him to treat me exactly the way he's treated 47 other people in this courtroom. Because now there's a record. Now there's evidence. Now there are witnesses who saw with their own eyes what happens to black people in Crenshaw Whitmore's courtroom. Marcus looked at her. This woman who had endured humiliation and threats and physical manhandling without ever breaking, without ever revealing the power she held. And something shifted in his understanding of what strength really looked like. Thank you. The words were inadequate, and he knew it. I don't know how to thank your grandmother. Lorraine's eyes moved to Mama Opal, still sitting in the front row of the gallery, still clutching her rosary, still weeping tears of relief. She never stopped fighting for you. She never stopped believing that someone would listen. Marcus turned toward his grandmother, and Mama Opal rose from her seat with the energy of a woman half her age. She rushed forward, past the bar that separated the gallery from the court, past the defense table, and wrapped her arms around her grandson for the first time in 8 months. They had been separated since his arrest, allowed only brief visits through plexiglass barriers, their conversations monitored and recorded, their embraces forbidden by rules designed to remind the accused that they were no longer fully human. Now there were no barriers, no monitors, no guards watching to ensure they didn't touch for too long. Just a grandmother and her grandson, holding each other in a courtroom where justice had finally, impossibly, prevailed. Mama Opal pulled back just enough to look at Marcus's face, her weathered hands cupping his cheeks the way she had done when he was a frightened 6-year-old crying for his mother. I knew. Her voice was fierce with vindication. I knew God would send someone. I prayed every night, baby. Every single night. I told him you were innocent. I told him you needed help, and he sent her. She looked at Lorraine with the gratitude of someone who had witnessed a miracle. That woman sat in this courtroom and let them treat her like dirt. Let them call her names. Let them drag her out. And the whole time, she was the one with all the power. Mama Opal shook her head in wonder. That's something, baby. That's really something. Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, embarrassed by the tears but unable to stop them. 8 months. 8 months in a cell, wondering if he would spend the next 15 years in a place like that. 8 months of visits through plexiglass, of phone calls that cut off after 15 minutes, of sleeping on a thin mattress and eating food that tasted like despair. And now it was over. It did not feel real. It might not feel real for weeks, for months, for years. The human mind did not process reversals of fortune quickly. Some part of him would probably always be waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to say it was a mistake, for the cell door to slam shut again. But for now, in this moment, his grandmother was holding him. The judge who had tried to destroy him was in handcuffs, and a woman he had never met had risked everything to save his life. Grandma, his voice cracked. How do I thank someone for giving me my life back? Mama Opal pulled him close again. You live it, baby. You live it well. You make something of yourself. You help other people the way she helped you. She stroked his hair the way she had done when he was small. That's how you thank her. You pass it on. Around them, the courtroom continued to empty. Federal agents secured evidence. Court staff answered questions. Journalists conducted interviews with anyone willing to speak. But in the center of it all, an old woman and her grandson held each other and simply breathed. They had made it. Against all odds. Against a system designed to crush them. Against power that should have been insurmountable. They had made it. The afternoon stretched toward evening as the machinery of accountability continued to turn. AUSA Blackwell coordinated with local authorities, ensuring that the transition of custody was handled properly, that the paperwork was filed correctly, that every procedural requirement was met. This case would be scrutinized by every defense attorney, every appeals court, every media outlet in the country. It had to be flawless. Lorraine remained in the courtroom, answering questions from the remaining court staff, providing documentation to the federal team, ensuring that nothing was missed, nothing forgotten, nothing lost in the chaos of the day's events. Mercer Kingsley approached her during a brief lull, his face still wet with tears, his hands still trembling with the aftershocks of his public confession. Judge Vesper, his voice cracked on her title. I don't know how to apologize for what I did, for what I almost let happen to Marcus, for all the others. How many? Lorraine's voice was not accusatory, merely factual. How many cases did they make you tank, Mr. Kingsley? He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, the tears had returned. 31, over 4 years. 31 defendants who went to prison because I was too scared to fight back. And you have documentation? Records? Anything that might help us identify them? I kept everything. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I told myself I was keeping it in case someone ever came to investigate, in case someone ever cared enough to look, but really... He swallowed hard. Really, I think I kept it because I needed proof that it wasn't my fault, that I was forced, that I didn't have a choice. Lorraine was quiet for a long moment. You had a choice, Mr. Kingsley. You made the wrong one. 31 times, you made the wrong one. He flinched as if she had struck him. But you also kept records when destroying them would have been easier. You confessed in open court when staying silent would have protected you, and now you have another choice. She met his eyes directly. The Department of Justice is going to need comprehensive testimony about how this operation worked, who gave the orders, how the instructions were communicated, Which cases were targeted and why? Your cooperation could help overturn wrongful convictions, could help free people who are sitting in prison right now for crimes they didn't commit. I'll do it." The words came out immediately without hesitation. "Whatever you need, whatever it takes. I'll testify against all of them. It won't be easy. Whitmore has friends in the state bar, the county commission, probably the state legislature. They'll come after you. They'll try to destroy your credibility, your career, your life." "My career?" A bitter laugh escaped him. "Judge Vesper, I haven't had a career in 4 years. I've had a hostage situation. Whatever they do to me now, at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror again." Lorraine studied him for a moment, assessing. Then she nodded. "The federal team will be in contact. Be ready to provide everything you have." She turned to walk away, then stopped. "Mr. Kingsley?" "Yes?" "For what it's worth, it takes courage to admit you were wrong. Not as much courage as it would have taken to do the right thing in the first place, but still, courage." She left him standing there, processing a compliment that felt more like a challenge. Across the courtroom, Garrison Holt had finally gathered his scattered papers and was attempting to organize them with hands that still shook. His 94% conviction rate, the rate that had made him the envy of his colleagues, the rate that had positioned him for a judgeship of his own, now looked very different. It looked like complicity. He looked up as Lorraine approached, and in his eyes she saw something she had seen many times before, in the faces of people who had benefited from corrupt systems. The desperate calculation of someone trying to figure out how much they knew, how much they were responsible for, how much trouble they were actually in. "Judge Vesper," his voice was carefully neutral, "I want you to know that I had no knowledge of the evidence suppression. I prosecuted cases based on what was presented to me. I never—" "Your conviction rate." Lorraine cut him off without raising her voice. 94%, isn't it?" "Yes, but did you ever wonder why it was so high? Did you ever notice that defense attorneys in this courtroom never seemed to mount effective challenges? Did you ever ask yourself why evidence that should have created reasonable doubt somehow never appeared in the cases you prosecuted?" Holt's mouth opened, then closed again. "I thought not." Lorraine's voice carried no anger, only a kind of weary disappointment. "You didn't know because you chose not to know. You didn't ask because you didn't want the answers. You let this happen because it benefited you. And now you're going to have to decide whether you want to be remembered as someone who helped clean up this mess or someone who helped create it." Holt's face went through several expressions: denial, fear, calculation, and finally something that might have been the beginning of genuine remorse. "I have a family." His voice was barely above a whisper. "2 daughters. They're going to see their father's name associated with all of this. They're going to grow up knowing that I was part of—" "Then show them something different." Lorraine's voice softened slightly. "Show them that when you realized what was happening, you did everything you could to make it right. That's the story you can still write, Mr. Holt. But you have to start writing it now." He was silent for a long moment, staring at the scattered papers on the prosecution table as if they held answers he desperately needed. "What do I do?" The question emerged like a confession. "I've been prosecuting cases in this courtroom for 7 years. If the whole thing was rigged—" He could not finish the sentence. "You start by cooperating fully with the federal investigation. You provide every piece of information you have about how cases were handled, which ones seemed unusual, any communications you received that might have influenced your decisions. You help us identify victims who might otherwise fall through the cracks. And then you figure out what kind of prosecutor you actually want to be. One who chases conviction rates or one who chases justice." She paused. "They're not always the same thing. Today proved that." She left him with that choice and walked toward the gallery, where journalist Indigo Callahan was waiting with a notebook full of questions and a recorder that had captured every moment of the afternoon's events. "Judge Vesper." Indigo's voice was professional, but there was excitement underneath it, the excitement of a reporter who had just witnessed the story of her career. "Can you comment on the scope of the federal investigation? How long has the DOJ been looking at Judge Whitmore? Are there other judges involved?" Lorraine held up one hand. "I can't comment on an ongoing investigation, but I can tell you this. What happened in this courtroom today is not an isolated incident. It's not one bad judge or one corrupt clerk. It's a system that allowed this to continue for a decade because the people with power to stop it chose not to look. Will there be more arrests? I can't comment on that. What about the 47 cases you mentioned? Will those convictions be reviewed? The Department of Justice will be working with local authorities to review every case tried in this courtroom during Judge Whitmore's tenure. Defendants who were wrongfully convicted will have their cases examined. Those with merit will be referred for appropriate relief. And Marcus Delaney? Lorraine glanced toward the defense table where Marcus and his grandmother still held each other. surrounded now by court staff and federal agents, by the chaos of an unprecedented afternoon. Mr. Delaney should never have been charged in the first place. The evidence against him was circumstantial at best, manufactured at worst. His alibi was suppressed by his own defense attorney on orders from a corrupt judge. She paused. He's going home tonight, Ms. Callahan. That's the only comment I have about Marcus Delaney. The sun was setting by the time the courtroom finally emptied. The federal team had taken custody of all relevant documents, all recordings, all physical evidence. The court reporter had provided certified transcripts of every word spoken during the proceedings. The witnesses had been interviewed, their contact information recorded, their cooperation secured. Lorraine stood alone in the center of courtroom 4C, looking at the empty bench where Crenshaw Whitmore had ruled for 24 years. The gavel still lay where he had dropped it, a small wooden symbol of power that had been used to destroy so many lives. She picked it up, felt its weight in her hand. 47 people had stood where Marcus Delaney had stood. 47 people had heard this gavel come down on their hopes, their futures, their freedom. 47 people had been convicted by a system that was supposed to protect them, sentenced by a man who saw them as less than human, imprisoned by a conspiracy that valued smooth operation over justice. Terrence Patterson, 8 years in prison for an assault he didn't commit. Security footage proving his innocence, suppressed by a clerk following orders. Darnell Washington, 12 years for armed robbery. His alibi witnesses threatened into silence by prosecutors who knew the truth. Keisha Monroe, 5 years for drug possession. The public defender assigned to her case was told to accept a plea deal without investigating the illegal search that produced the evidence against her. Name after name, case after case, life after life. Lorraine set the gavel down on the bench and turned away. Tomorrow, the work of undoing the damage would begin. The appeals would be filed, the reviews would be conducted, the victims would be contacted, told that someone had finally listened, that someone had finally cared enough to look. But tonight, Marcus Delaney was going home. And that was enough. That was enough for tonight. In 6 hours, Lorraine Vesper dismantled 24 years of judicial tyranny, freed an innocent man, and exposed a corruption network that reached the state capitol. But the documents she recovered suggest Atlanta was just the beginning. 46 more wrongful convictions need review. A senator's name appeared in the files, and someone in Washington sent her a message that changes everything. If watching justice prevail made your heart race, our next story features another underdog whose hidden identity brought down an entire criminal empire. Subscribe, because the best satisfying justice content is just getting started. 1 month later, the headlines had been relentless. Corrupt judge arrested in own courtroom. Federal judge goes undercover, exposes decade of judicial abuse. 47 wrongful convictions, the Whitmore scandal. DOJ launches pattern or practice investigation into Fulton County courts. The story had gone national within hours of Whitmore's arrest, international within days. Lorraine Vesper's face had appeared on the covers of Time, Newsweek, and The Atlantic. Her testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee had been watched by 15 million people. Her name had become synonymous with a kind of justice that most people had stopped believing was possible. She hated all of it. She had not done this for fame. She had not done it for recognition. She had done it because 47 people had been destroyed by a system she had sworn to serve. And someone had to be willing to tear that system apart. The accolades kept coming despite her discomfort. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund had honored her with their Lifetime Achievement Award, despite her protests that her lifetime was far from over and her achievements were just beginning. The American Bar Association had invited her to give the keynote address at their annual convention. Law schools across the country had requested permission to use the Whitmore case as curriculum material. She declined most of the invitations, accepted only the ones that might advance the cause of reform, kept her head down and continued the work that actually mattered. Because for every headline celebrating her courage, there was someone still sitting in a prison cell waiting to be freed. For every award ceremony she attended, there was a victim whose case had not yet been reviewed. For every interview she gave, there was a corrupt official who remained in power, watching, waiting, planning their response. Now she sat in her chambers in the federal courthouse. The same building where she had been appointed 4 months earlier. The same building where her career as a federal judge had begun with a secret assignment that had consumed 18 months of her life. The office was modest by judicial standards. A desk cluttered with case files. Bookshelves lined with legal treatises and constitutional commentaries. A window that looked out on the Atlanta skyline, glittering in the late afternoon sun. On her desk, a stack of files represented the ongoing aftermath of the Whitmore case. 15 wrongful convictions had been overturned so far. 15 people had been released from prison, their records expunged, their lives returned to them as much as any bureaucratic process could return a life that had been stolen. 31 more cases were under review. The legal process was slow, methodical, frustrating. Each case required individual examination, individual documentation, individual judicial proceedings. Each case represented a person who had spent years in prison for a crime they didn't commit. A person who was still waiting, still hoping, still wondering if anyone would ever come for them. Bellamy Ashford had pleaded guilty to conspiracy and obstruction, accepting a sentence of 3 years in exchange for comprehensive testimony about the operation she had helped run. Her cooperation had provided crucial documentation, filling in gaps that might otherwise have remained mysterious. Mercer Kingsley had been disbarred, as expected, but he had also become the prosecution's star witness, providing detailed testimony about how the scheme worked, how public defenders were coerced into sabotaging their own clients, how the threat of career destruction was used to ensure compliance. His testimony would be central to the federal case against Whitmore. Garrison Holt had resigned as assistant district attorney and announced his intention to work with the Georgia Innocence Project, using his knowledge of the system to help undo the damage he had helped cause. Lorraine was not sure whether this represented genuine redemption or merely sophisticated damage control. Time would tell. And Whitmore himself remained in federal custody, denied bail due to flight risk and the ongoing discovery of additional crimes. His defense team had filed motion after motion, claiming entrapment, claiming prosecutorial misconduct, claiming that Lorraine's undercover operation violated his due process rights. The motions had been denied, all of them. Judge Crenshaw Whitmore would stand trial for federal civil rights violations. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The witnesses were numerous and credible. The outcome, while not predetermined, seemed inevitable. Justice finally was coming for him. But Lorraine knew better than to celebrate prematurely. The system that had protected Whitmore for 24 years was larger than one corrupt judge. The network that had enabled his crimes extended far beyond courtroom 4C, and the forces that had benefited from his corruption were not going to surrender without a fight. A knock at her chamber door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Her clerk entered, a young woman named Sarah who had been assigned to her upon her appointment and who had proven invaluable during the chaos of the past month. "Judge Vesper, this arrived for you. No return address. Hand-delivered by courier." She held out a manila envelope thick with contents bearing only Lorraine's name and the address of the federal courthouse. Lorraine took the envelope with a sense of foreboding that had been honed by decades of experience. Anonymous packages rarely contained good news. Anonymous packages delivered to federal judges investigating corruption contained even less. "Thank you, Sarah. That will be all." The clerk departed, closing the door behind her. Lorraine studied the envelope for a moment. No markings except her name. No indication of origin. The paper was high quality. The kind used by government agencies and law firms. Not the kind available at office supply stores. She opened it carefully and withdrew the contents. The first item was a USB drive, small and black, unmarked except for a small label reading Phase 2. The second item was a single sheet of paper typed, unsigned. She read it once, then again, then a third time, her heart rate increasing with each pass. Judge Vesper, Whitmore was regional coordinator for Georgia. There are 5 other jurisdictions with identical patterns: Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, South Carolina, Tennessee. The money trail leads to Washington. The confirmation hearing was compromised. Check the committee. Attached files contain documentation of the network. 6 judges, 2 state senators, 1 federal appointee currently under consideration. They know about your investigation. They are taking steps to contain it. Be careful who you trust. A friend. Lorraine set the letter down and stared at the USB drive. 5 other jurisdictions, 6 more corrupt judges, 2 state senators, a federal appointee. The confirmation hearing was compromised. She thought about her own confirmation hearing 4 months ago. The questions that had been asked. The senators who had voted against her, 6 of them, an unusually high number for a district court appointment. The delays that had pushed her confirmation back by 3 months. Had someone known? Had someone tried to stop her before she even began? She inserted the USB drive into her computer and began to scroll through the files. What she found made her blood run cold. Maps showing judicial districts across the Southeast, each one marked with conviction rate disparities that mirrored what she had found in Atlanta. Financial records showing payments from political action committees to judicial campaigns, the amounts suspiciously similar across all 6 jurisdictions. Email chains with headers, redacted but content preserved, discussing efficiency measures and conviction optimization and maintaining appropriate outcomes, and a list of names. 6 judges, each one sitting on a state bench, each one showing the same statistical patterns as Whitmore. 2 state senators, both serving on judiciary committees, both in positions to influence judicial appointments and oversight, and one name that made Lorraine's hands go still on the keyboard, a federal appellate judge, currently under consideration for elevation to the Supreme Court. If this documentation was accurate, and the level of detail suggested it was, then Crenshaw Whitmore had not been an aberration. He had been a franchise operator, one node in a network that spanned half the former Confederacy, a network designed to ensure that the criminal justice system continued to function as it always had, producing predetermined outcomes for predetermined populations. And someone in Washington was at the top of it. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered without speaking, her training taking over, her instincts screaming that this call was connected to the envelope that had just arrived. Judge Vesper. The voice was distorted, electronically altered, impossible to identify. Congratulations on Atlanta. You've made powerful enemies, but you've also gained allies. Who is this? Someone who wants what you want. Someone who has been waiting for someone like you for a very long time. The files you sent are authentic. Every document has been verified. Every name can be corroborated. The network is real, Judge Vesper. It's been operating for 23 years. It has protected itself through a combination of institutional loyalty, strategic appointments, and the systematic destruction of anyone who got too close to the truth. Lorraine's mind raced through the implications. 23 years. Long enough to shape entire generations of judicial appointments. Long enough to embed loyalists throughout the court system. Long enough to build something that would be nearly impossible to dismantle. Why are you telling me this? Why now? Because you proved something in Atlanta. You proved that the network can be exposed. That one person with enough evidence and enough courage can tear a hole in the wall they've built. The distorted voice paused. But you also proved that the network will fight back. The motions Whitmore's defense team filed, the claims of entrapment, of prosecutorial misconduct, those arguments came from the network's playbook. They've used them before. They'll use them again. What do you want me to do? The committee meets in 3 weeks, the Judicial Oversight Committee of the State Bar Association. They're going to discuss lessons learned from the Whitmore case. They're going to recommend reforms designed to prevent future investigations like yours from succeeding. How do you know this? Because I've been watching them for longer than you've been a judge, Lorraine. Because I know how they operate. Because I've been waiting for someone who could do what you did. Someone who could break through. And now that you have, I'm not going to let them bury it. The line was silent for a moment. 3 weeks, the voice continued. The committee meets. The playbook activates. They're going to try to reframe the narrative. To turn Whitmore into an isolated bad actor instead of what he really was. A symptom of systemic corruption. They're going to protect their own, the way they've always protected their own. And you want me to stop them. I want you to be ready. The files I sent you are just the beginning. There's more, much more. But you need to understand what you're walking into. You need to understand that the people you're going up against have been doing this for longer than you've been alive. And they don't lose. They've never lost. Until now. Another pause. When the voice spoke again, there was something in it that might have been respect. Until now. That's exactly right, Judge Vesper. Until now. The line went dead. Lorraine set her phone down and looked at the files still displayed on her computer screen. 6 judges, 2 senators, a Supreme Court nominee, a network that had been operating for 23 years, a conspiracy that had shaped the criminal justice system across half the South, and someone, friend or enemy she could not yet tell, who wanted her to tear it all down. She thought about Marcus Delaney, home now with his grandmother, enrolled in community college, trying to rebuild a life that should never have been disrupted. She thought about the 15 people who had been released so far, blinking in the sunlight outside prison gates, trying to remember how to be free. She thought about the 31 still waiting, still hoping, still wondering if anyone would ever come for them. And she thought about the names on the list in front of her, the 6 judges still sitting on benches across the Southeast, still wielding power over people who had no idea how thoroughly the game was rigged against them. The 2 senators still making decisions about judicial appointments, still ensuring that the network's people ended up in positions of authority. The appellate judge, whose elevation to the Supreme Court would cement the network's influence at the highest level of American jurisprudence. She could walk away. She had done enough. She had exposed one corrupt judge, freed one innocent man, initiated reviews that would eventually help dozens more. She could return to her regular docket. hear cases, issue rulings, live the quiet life of a federal judge who had already made her mark. Or she could open the next file. She could follow the thread wherever it led. She could become what the network feared most, someone who would not stop, could not be bought, refused to be intimidated. Lorraine pulled her worn leather notebook from her bag, the same notebook she had carried into courtroom 4C, the same notebook that had documented 47 cases of corruption, the same notebook that had survived contempt charges and physical threats and a day that would be studied in law schools for decades. She opened it to a fresh page, wrote the date, and then, in careful letters, Phase 2, the network. Below that, she began to list the names. The work was far from over, but then again, it always had been. Justice was not a destination. It was a direction, a choice made over and over again, every day, in every courtroom, in every decision to stand up instead of stand down. Lorraine Vesper had made that choice in courtroom 4C. She had made it when she let herself be dragged from a public gallery for the crime of taking notes. She had made it when she endured contempt charges rather than reveal her identity. She had made it when she watched a corrupt system try to destroy an innocent man and decided that she would be the one to stop it. Now she was making it again. The network had been operating for 23 years. It was about to meet the woman who would bring it down. In the gathering darkness of her chambers, surrounded by the evidence of crimes that spanned decades and states and the highest levels of American government, Judge Lorraine Catherine Vesper began to plan her next move. Outside, the Atlanta skyline glittered with 10,000 lights, each one representing a life being lived, a story unfolding, a person who might or might not receive justice depending on decisions made in rooms they would never see by people they would never meet. Lorraine had spent her career trying to ensure that those decisions were fair, that the system worked the way it was supposed to work, that justice was more than just a word carved into marble above courthouse doors. The Whitmore case had proven that she was willing to go further than most. The files on her computer suggested she would need to go further still. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, somewhere in Atlanta, Marcus Delaney was eating dinner with his grandmother. 15 innocent people were sleeping in their own beds for the first time in years. And a corrupt judge who had destroyed dozens of lives was sitting in a federal holding cell, contemplating a future that looked very different from the one he had planned. Justice was not complete. It never was. But it was closer than it had been yesterday. And tomorrow, Lorraine would wake up and continue the work, because that was what justice required. Not perfection, not completion, just the willingness to keep moving in the right direction. One case at a time, one day at a time, one choice at a time. She closed her notebook, turned off her computer, and gathered her things. The network was waiting, and so was she. What started in courtroom 4C was just the opening argument. The real trial was about to begin.